Jesus, King of angels, heaven's light. Shine your face upon this house tonight. Let no evil come into my dreams. Remind me how you made dark spirits flee and spoke your power to the raging sea and spoke your mercy to a sinful man. Remind me, Jesus, for this is what I am. The universe is vast beyond the stars, but you are mindful when a sparrow falls, and mindful of the anxious thoughts that find me, surround me, and bind me. With all my heart, I love you, sovereign Lord. Tomorrow let me love you even more, and rise to speak the goodness of your name, until I close my eyes and sleep again. The universe is vast beyond the stars, but you are mindful when a sparrow falls, and mindful of the anxious thoughts that find me, surround me, and bind me. Jesus, King of angels, heaven's light. Hold my hand and keep me through the night.
All right. We are thankful that the Lord has called Brother Ty and Brother Vince into the ministry, and believe it's incumbent upon us to let them practice their gifts as often as they possibly can. So, Brother Vince, we're glad you are going to bring the message to us. You come on down. He asked me, he said, how long do I have? And I said, well, just take as long as you want. But turn the lights out when you leave. No. Come on up here, brother.
I definitely won't be the last one here, that's for sure. So, don't worry. We'll probably get out a little bit early. But if y'all would go ahead and turn over to Luke chapter 5 with me. At first I planned to do something related to the Lord's Supper tonight, and then very quickly realized I'm not smart enough to do that. So we're going to just do something completely different. We're going to be focusing on the first 7 verses of Luke chapter 5, and this is a very well-known passage, but we're going to be looking at it in a little bit of a different way than at least I usually hear it talked about. So please don't tune me out just because you think you know what I'm going to say, even though you might. But let's go ahead and read verses 1 through 7 real quick. Luke chapter 5. And it came to pass that as the people pressed upon him to hear the word of God, he stood by the lake of that one and saw 2 ships standing by the lake. But the fishermen were gone out of them and were washing their nets. And he entered into one of the ships, which was Simon's, and prayed him that he would thrust out a little from the land. And he sat down and taught the people out of the ship. Now when he had left speaking, he said unto Simon, Launch out into the deep, and let down your nets for a draught. And Simon answered, saying unto him, Master, we have toiled all the night, and have taken nothing. Nevertheless, at thy word I will let down the net. And when they had this done, they enclosed a great multitude of fish, and their net brake, and they beckoned unto their partners, which were in the other ship, that they should come and help them. And they came and filled both the ships, so that they began to sink. So, the title of my sermon today is, Will You Cast the Net? Or, as Simon said, Nevertheless, at thy word, I will let down the net. So, usually this passage is focused on for the great abundance that God gives his people, and that is amazing, but there's something more that happened in this that led to that. And so, just for a little context, even though we mostly got it, but Jesus was preaching, and the Bible doesn't exactly say it, but for whatever reason, he wanted to get a little away from the crowd. Maybe they were too close, or not everyone could hear, who knows. But he saw these two ships that had just got done fishing, and he asked them if they'll let him use their boat to preach off of. And Simon says that's fine, and he lets them onto the boat, and he preaches to the people. And then at the end of that is where my sermon will begin tonight, in verse number 4, where it says, Now when he had left speaking, he said unto Simon, Launch out into the deep, and let down your nets for a draught. So here, in verse number 4, we can see a command. And we don't know how much Simon knew about Jesus at this point, because the Bible doesn't say. As far as we know, this is the first he'd heard of him or met him. And already Jesus requests him to do something for him. He gives him a command to go out and cast his net. So this is probably a little strange to Simon, because this is just some random person that he just met a couple minutes ago. And he already asked to use his boat to preach off of, and now he's asking him to throw his freshly cleaned net back in the water. But Jesus asked him anyway, though it seemed a bit strange. And then let's read the first bit of verse 5 here. And Simon answering said unto him, Master, we have toiled all the night and have taken nothing. So in this verse, we see the evidence. And Jesus asked him to do it, and Simon told him, We've been out here all night. We haven't caught a single fish. And I'm sure anyone that's ever fished before can understand that frustration. If you take all the time to go out there and you don't even get a bite. And to make it even worse, this was their living. They had to do this to make money. So you can imagine he might have been a little irritated when Jesus asked him to throw his net back in the water, because he's been out there all night and didn't get a single thing. He might have been mumbling under his voice, like, if you really want me to show you, I'll show you that there's not a single fish in this water. Something interesting that I read, apparently the type of fishing that people assume they were doing, it's best to do at night, and it's best to do in shallow water. But here, Jesus commands them to do it in a completely different way. Because we can assume here that it is morning, it is day. And also, he commands them in verse 4 to launch out into the deep. So he's telling them to get away from the shore and to do it during the day, which is the exact opposite of the way that they were taught to do it. So you can yet again imagine Simon might have been thinking, he doesn't even know how you're supposed to fish. He doesn't understand this at all. So this couldn't possibly work. And I think you can really see this in your own life, because there's been many times, at least for me, that we'll feel discouraged and like there's no point. Because the things we've been trying to do, it's just showing no fruit, and like we haven't caught any fish. And whatever it may be, maybe you have a family member that you've witnessed to, or a friend, or you have a Sunday school class or a Bible study that you do, and you prepare for it every week, and maybe no one shows up, or the people that show up don't seem to listen or care. But you keep doing it anyway, and you reach the point where it just feels like such a waste of time, and like nothing is going to come from it. You just want to quit so bad, but you can just feel that God is telling you, do it again. And as he says here, he's telling you to let down your nets. And just like Jesus commanded Simon to go into the deep, don't think just because it doesn't seem like the best way, or maybe you think there's a better place, or whatever it may be, you have to listen to God and follow his leading. He definitely knows better than you, and you may think you're an expert, just like Simon might have thought. But obviously, God knows much better. So you might want to, whenever you get to the point where it just feels useless, I know I've come to this point. You might just want to be like, God, why? I've tried, and there's nothing coming from this. Why would I do it again? And you shouldn't be like that. Simon sets a great example of how we should reply to God in these moments. In the second part of verse 5 here, where he says, "Nevertheless, at thy word, I will let down the net." He's saying, it doesn't matter that I've been out here all night long and I haven't caught a single fish. If you tell me to do it, I'm going to do it. This is just such a beautiful showing of obedience, and at least I've always looked it over in this story. Everything pointed to the fact that he shouldn't cast his nets. They didn't catch one fish all night, and they had, at least the Bible tells us they at least began cleaning their nets, which means they had to get all the gunk out of it, all the weeds, and they started fixing any holes that might have been in them. So they already had started doing that, but Simon still says, it doesn't matter. I'm going to cast this net back in the water because he told me to. I don't know if me at least, I don't know about you all, I don't know if I'd have that kind of obedience, because he's getting the net back out that he just cleaned, that he just got done having to deal with, just to get it dirty again for what seemed like to him a waste of time. So yet again, just like a Sunday school class, you might be like, I don't want to have to put this work in and make another lesson just for these people to come and not even listen to what I say. But something interesting, at least as far as we know, in this passage, this is, like I said before, I think the first time Simon met Jesus, as we know. And as far as we know, he's a lost man at this time. And he's showing this much obedience. So can we as saved people not even do that? But I just think it's kind of sad that, at least as far as we know, this lost person shows more obedience than probably most of us. Now I'd like to go ahead and read verse 6 and 7 one more time. And when they had this done, they enclosed a great multitude of fishes, and their net brake, and they beckoned unto their partners, which were in the other ship, that they should come and help them. And they came and filled both the ships, so that they began to sink. So, because Simon obeyed and put his net back in the water, Jesus provided them with more fish than the boats could even handle, more fish than they probably could have caught in a normal night of fishing, all because they were obedient to put the net back in the water. This isn't in the Bible necessarily, but I don't think it's wrong to say this, that it could have happened, because this happens in our life. But if it's wrong, then, you have to figure that out on your own. But as I said earlier, Simon was trying to catch fish in the exact opposite way of what was supposed to be the best way to do it. So I imagine there could have been some fishermen in the crowd that had listened to Jesus preach, and they might have been laughing a little bit, looking at Simon like he was an idiot, because clearly this will never work. Why is he even trying? So when you're trying to do stuff for the Lord, you'll probably, if not definitely, have people laugh at you and say things like, that's just a waste of time. There's such a better way to do that, especially by the world, but sadly, it might even happen from people within the church. Because everyone thinks they know the best way, but if you're truly following the Lord, it doesn't matter if it's the best way to do it. It's what he wants you to do. Let's see here. I'm getting lost a little bit. I would also just like to point out here that there was a smaller form of obedience that Simon showed earlier in this chapter in verse 3, where Jesus asked him to thrust out a little from the land. In verse 3, he entered into his ship, which was Simon's, and prayed him that he would thrust out a little from the land. And this was a small request compared to what he would ask him later. He wasn't asking him to go far, just a little way off the water. Simon could have had the attitude of, well, really, will it really make that much a difference if you stand right here, if you're 20 feet off the shore? And he could think that because Simon couldn't see the big picture. Clearly, he did it anyway, but I'm just thinking what we could have thought. If Simon refused to do this small form of obedience, Jesus couldn't have ever asked him to go into the deep, and then he wouldn't have been able to ask him to cast his net in the water, which would have stopped Simon from being able to be a part of this great miracle. And it's so easy to ignore the small things because it seems so unnecessary. But without this small act of obedience, Simon, yet again, wouldn't be able to be a part of that miracle. So in our lives, we can't ignore the small things, because how can you expect God to trust you with big decisions and big forms of obedience if you can't even take care of it in the small parts? This shows us that we shouldn't. This also shows us that we shouldn't expect blessings as soon as we obey one thing from God. In this story, Simon obeys 3 separate commands before he ever received anything. So this tells you just because you aren't seeing anything happen right now, and it doesn't seem like your work is being blessed, doesn't mean you're necessarily doing the wrong thing. You might just not be to the final step yet. Sometimes, at least for me, if we feel like our work's not being blessed, we think it means that we're doing the wrong thing. But sometimes God is just testing our patience and our obedience. Because it's not an easy thing to try again when you've done nothing but fail. So sometimes God puts us in places like this to test our obedience and see if we'll cast the net one more time, even though it doesn't make any sense. Yet again, I feel like we always look at this story as God giving an abundance, but he couldn't give the abundance without our obedience. I think because of this, there are so many Christians that don't understand why God isn't giving them abundantly, or are hardly even giving them enough to get by. But maybe they're not following what the Lord has for them, so he can't. Because if you're not obeying the Lord, why would he give you what you need, or more than what you need? Though it is true, God is capable and willing to give you more than you need in every aspect of life, he offers it through obedience. You can't have one without the other. If Simon never threw the net back in the water, how could he have caught all the fish? We see time and time again through the Bible the importance of obedience. It can be said if you don't have obedience, you don't have much of a relationship with God. The Bible talks about his people doing as he commands. So if we don't do that, we are being a very poor example of God's people. The Bible says in John 14:15, "If you love me, keep my commandments." So we clearly can see the importance here. He tells us if we love him, we'll have to keep his commandments. And in other words, obey. So you can't truly love God without obeying him. And as the Bible says in Matthew 6:24, paraphrasing here, but you can't serve 2 gods. You can't serve 2 masters. And you can't choose to obey God sometimes and then obey someone else or something else over God in other times. So this is a very simple message, but just in closing, I just want to go over what I've said. If you want God to do great things in your life, if you want to be used by God, you must have obedience in the small and the big things. Even when others might call you a fool, or you just must do what God commanded you, no matter how crazy it may seem. Yet again, I understand this is a very simple message, but you can't have a walk with the Lord without obedience. It's the first step in pretty much everything we do for God. But that's all I've got. So.